Hello and welcome to another DIY bonsai Q&A session. It's good to see all your smiling faces. I hope your trees are growing like crazy, but not too crazy. It's been an insane spring over here, repotting like what felt like all day, every day from February until it's almost May now. So yeah, I've skipped a month. I'll be playing catch up over the next few weeks. Let's dive into the first question. On the Discord server, we've got Acting Basher, who says, if I have a smaller tree that I want to thicken and make larger, would it be better to not do any pruning or prune it every once in a while and grow ramification to some extent? So basically, what's better for thickening the trunk, ramified branches or fewer extended branches? So thickening the trunk in the bonsai context is a compromise, as you've sort of pointed out in your question, between letting it grow long and managing the growth. And at the extreme ends, if we let the tree grow continuously, it becomes a full-size tree. Or if we manage the growth like we would a refined bonsai, the thickening is very slow. So somewhere in between those two extremes is a happy compromise, a happy medium between the thickening speed and the aesthetic quality of the tree. So we've got a trade-off. How do you decide where to sit in between the two extremes of the trade-off? Well, with any trade-off, there are compromises to be made. If you let the tree grow too quickly without any management, you then have to make bigger, more drastic moves to compress the size of the tree into bonsai proportions. So that means potentially bigger scars if you have to do a drastic chop. It may mean longer distance between each branch. There might be no transition of taper, so the trunk might be thick enough and then it abruptly goes to skinny branches. Then you have to sort of grow and thicken the next section of the leader. So I think to get thickening, yes, you must let it grow, but you also need to keep an eye on what is left on the tree when you cut that long, thick piece off. Are you trying to minimize or avoid scars? In that case, it may be beneficial to let the leader or the sacrifice branch grow, but cut it back sooner so that the scar is smaller and can heal more successfully. Are you working with a species that doesn't readily backbud, in which case you do need to manage the branches that will be left behind after the chop, like pines are a good example of this. You need to keep enough strength in those side branches that they don't die in comparison to the strong leader, while at the same time not having them be so strong that they slow down the growth and thickening. So it's a case of managing some of the growth, letting the other growth go. If the sacrifice branches become too weak, then you have to sort of let them grow a bit more, then cut them back. It's a balancing act, and really it needs a whole video, a series of videos for each type of tree and the growth habit that they have. But the quick answer is you need to do both. You need to let some grow to thicken, and you need to have an eye on the future and what's going to be left behind after you do the chop. But in terms of like pure thickening, growth. The bigger, the longer it grows, the more it thickens. If you prune, you're slowing down the growth for a period. That slows down the thickening. It's really as simple as that. The complexity comes in allowing the growth, but managing it with the future goals in mind. Okay, on to the next one then. Barry Cox says, while I was combing out the roots of some beech from a nursery, I got to pondering about the circling roots. Do they always go clockwise or anti-clockwise? Is there a preference? And if so, could that be to do with the northern-southern hemisphere phenomenon of water going down a plug hole? Just a whimsical thought. I must admit, I have thought about this as well. Just the things that crop up in your mind when you're combing out roots. So there's the Coriolis effect that affects things like weather patterns and stuff. I don't know whether that's got anything to do with the water going down a sink. I don't know. I don't think that has an effect on tree roots though. I think the biggest factor is the sun. The sun's changing position warms the pot on one side more than the other. Maybe the shaded part stays damp for just a little bit longer. The roots circle in a direction depending on which way the sun goes, always east to west. Does it go east to west in the south? Must do. Yeah, of course it does. But yeah, I think it's the sun. Yeah. That's just my opinion. I've not looked into it other than root raking thoughts. So, nah, I don't know. And then like, what are we going to do with that information? Are we going to have the tree upside down for a period of time to even it out? Thanks for that, Barry. Okay. Tim Freeman asks, pinching or pruning to develop backbudding and ramification on both maples and pines. Do you suggest pinching out new growing tips or candles, or waiting for some extension and then pruning? So we do have to be clear about what we're trying to achieve with the tree. When you say backbudding, to me that means we've got some branches and we've got buds, and we want to encourage buds on wood where there are no buds already. To me that's backbudding. As opposed to we've got foliage where we want it, we just want to make it more dense, and that's increasing ramification. That's refining the ramification as opposed to developing new branches and ramification. It's just the way we get backbudding isn't necessarily the same as the way we add ramification and refine the ramification, if you see what I mean. You prune the tree, that gives you hopefully 2 shoots. Great. But that doesn't guarantee that you'll get buds further back on wood where there isn't currently foliage. To do that, the principle is the same between maples and pines, but pines are slightly more nuanced. Am I allowed to use that word? You let it grow. The tree has put energy into growing, into making new foliage. So then you need to give the tree time to gain some energy back so that it can use that energy to produce new buds on the older wood. Letting it grow also adds vascular tissue, and that vascular tissue has the potential to form new buds. It may not happen unless there is a reason for the tree to do so, but it has increased potential to produce buds. So once the foliage is hardened off, it's developed its sort of thicker skin. It's no longer like really soft, flimsy. It's got that waxy cuticle. It's had a week or two to use the sun to create more energy, and so now it's got some energy back from the growth that it produced. We then come in and prune, and that tells the tree, oh hey, do you know what, we need to produce some more foliage to replace some that was lost, and so that has the potential to produce new buds on the older wood. Pinching is different though. When you pinch, you are doing the work as the tree is growing. So the tree has put energy into producing some new growth, and before that new growth has had a chance to sit in the sun and produce more sugars and starches, we remove that growth. And so the tree has lost a bit of energy then. So because it's lost a bit of energy, the likelihood of new buds being produced further back is reduced. But also I believe that the hormones that are produced by the growing tip haven't really had a chance to establish their line of communication. So by pinching off the tip, it doesn't necessarily say to the tree, ooh, we've lost some foliage, better grow some more. What does pinching do then? It takes a little bit of the energy from that growing tip and encourages the tree to push more energy to the existing buds and foliage further back from the growing tip. So the strong shoots that have started elongating, we pinch them, we hold them back. The ones that maybe haven't started elongating or have only elongated a little bit and don't get pinched, they have a chance to catch up. So it balances the energy from the stronger tips and top to the weaker interior pieces. Also, by taking a bit of energy away, the branch won't thicken as much as it would have done if you just let it grow and then pruned later. So it's finer and has the potential to be more in scale with a small miniature bonsai tree. So pinching is for refining what you've got rather than adding more. Now, obviously, if a tree is really healthy and you pinch, you may get new back buds form, but that's not the primary response. That's not the most likely outcome. You're not saying to the tree, I want back buds from old wood. You're saying, oh, slow down a bit there, maybe let the other bits catch up. Oh, might have to edit that one to make a bit of sense. Tyler Weisskopf. I have a jade pre-bonsai I got from a nursery 2 years ago before I moved. Between it being attacked by our 2 cats, relatable, being knocked off of a 3-foot shelf, same cat, and yet the cat was unscathed. And the cross-country road trip in January, it was in rough shape. I've nursed it back to health and really want to work on pruning and shaping. I am, however, a total novice and could use some help on where to start, as well as how to have more foliage on it as well. Any and all help would be great. Thank you, and I've been really enjoying the channel. Thanks, Tyler. Let's have a look at these pictures. That's a cool jade. Yeah. Okay, so being a desert plant, they're used to growing in soils that have quite a high salt content. That means that they can tolerate lots of fertilizer. So to get jades growing really well, give them as much fertilizer as you dare. Like plenty of fertilizer. I don't know whether you can overdo it. You probably can, but like give it plenty. It'll grow really well, get really strong. And then on that sort of central trunk, it's kind of long and straight. What I would do once the tree is really bursting with health, it could be now, you'll have to judge that based on what the tree's doing. I'd cut it back a bit taller than maybe I'd like it, and what you'll get is plenty of buds here and there. Those buds will then grow into branches and you'll pick and choose the ones you want. On the sort of the trunk that's off to the side, cut that back to foliage, see what it gives you as a result, and I'd sort of move this one towards a kind of a raft style where you've got the sort of one trunk coming up from the base in the middle there, one's kind of off to the side. You might get, you know, 1 or 2 more chunks here and there to use, having pruned it quite hard. See what it gives you, give us some more pictures, and then we can help decide which branches you need to keep and which ones to remove moving forward, and how to wire them safely without sort of ripping, because you know succulents are a little bit brittle at times. So look forward to seeing the results of that. But yeah, sort of, you know, give it 8 inches or 20 odd centimeters on that trunk. It doesn't matter that it's got no leaves now, cut it back and it'll make new ones. You know, you might not necessarily keep it that tall. You want to give it extra just in case 1 or 2 nodes do dry up and die. You'll still have some to work with further down. In the middle of summer, I can't tell just by looking what the soil is, but I try and get it into some pumice, lava, an aggregate soil mix of some description. That'll keep the roots nice and happy. Then you'll be able to water it a bit more often without root rot occurring. That gets the fertilizer going through the soil more often, gets it even more pumped moving forward. Full sun, don't let it freeze. Obviously you've been doing a really great job keeping it healthy, but worth reiterating. Nat Joven says, or Nat Joven, sorry if I'm pronouncing these J's wrong. Anyway, Nat Joven says, what are your thoughts on fusing seedlings to create a thicker trunk? Are there any techniques to prevent visible scars from forming Which tree species are best for fused bonsai? So I've not tried it myself. The reason I've not tried it is because how can I put this? The reason I've not tried it yet is because of the number of plants it takes to end up with a pleasing result. So the idea of fusing them together is that you end up with a thicker trunk faster than you would just growing out an individual plant. But if you need, I don't know, if you need 10 plants to make one trunk, and if you end up with scarring or something goes wrong in the project, you've lost 10 plants. So in order to have a good chance of being successful, you need, I don't know, let's say 10 fusion projects on the go at once. Well, straight away we're into like 100 cuttings. Now that's 100 cuttings that I could grow individually and have a, I don't know, 70% success rate. So it may take longer to get there, but the quality I think is higher. The efficiency is higher, so I haven't bothered with it for that reason. If I were going to do it, I think Ficus, Trident maple, Japanese maple and other maple species probably can, but then you get into the quality of Japanese maple is the smooth bark, so if you're fusing them together you will be able to see like the fuse lines for many years. So although they will fuse, there's the disadvantage of seeing how the sausage was made, if you see what I mean. Tridents will outgrow those scars because they thicken so fast. Field maple, Acer campestre probably would as well. But like, then it's like the thicker, the faster a trunk, the faster a plant thickens, the more likely it will be to succeed as a fusion project. But if it thickens fast, you don't need to do the fusion. Like, just grow it normally. Yeah, Ficus. You probably could Flora as well. There's probably a number of species. You know, like things like, well, I don't know what they're called. Rhytia. It's not my area of expertise. I'd rather grow them individually. So I don't know. Ficus is the classic one though, isn't it? Tropical species that grow quickly. The quicker they grow, the better. The quicker they go, the less you need to do a fusion. That's my opinion. Sorry, it wasn't much help. Arizaji says, I have another question for creating a raft style Xanthosxylum piperatum. I think that's pronounced half correctly. It's kept indoor all year. I want to keep the original root system and a small part of the vertical trunk as a separate tree. There is a horizontal part of the trunk. I want to air layer or ground layer it in a way that new roots will grow all around the horizontal part. Should I remove the bark and cambium on the lower half of the horizontal trunk that will have contact with soil and sphagnum moss, or is it enough to bury the trunk without carving? How long does it normally take for this species to grow roots when ground layering? And in the image, the red line is the trunk line. I think the first step is to air layer it. Do a ring bark as if it's a normal air layer at the lowest point where you'd like the raft's trunk to begin. Do that normally, normal air layer or ground layer, as you would. And then along the trunk that you want to separate it, get it growing vigorously. Then when it's vigorous, cut windows where you want roots to form from the rest of the raft. I think if you try to do it all in one go, it will reduce the likelihood of success at the air layer, and it's air layering the top off that gives you the new tree. Do you see what I'm saying? So do the air layer first, separate it, then when it's healthy again and growing strongly, cut little windows wherever you want roots. Try and leave the cambium exposed. You don't need to go all the way through when you're just creating these windows. And you'll get roots in some of them, maybe all of them. Normal substrate or moss, whichever you prefer, whichever you think is more appropriate in the climate. And And over time, they'll root. Where it's in contact, they'll produce root. Where the trunk's in contact with soil, it'll produce roots even if you don't cut windows. But there's more chance of getting roots where you want if you do make if you do expose little windows of cambium. It's the cambium itself that gives rise to roots, so you don't have to remove the cambium as you would with an air layer, because you're not trying to create a completely separate tree. So it doesn't matter if it bridges. In fact, because it's only a window and not a complete ring, it is by definition still bridged. So there's no advantage to removing the cambium. And yeah, that'll do it. That'll give you the rough structure that you want. And I think you need, if you want to keep the lower section, you need some of it exposed to light so that buds will form. If you just do a ground layer and completely bury, the lower section may not produce new buds. It may simply die. So if you want the bottom to live, make sure it's got access to light and air so that buds can form successfully. Reiko says, if I ground layer an elm, but it still has a fairly large root system below the layer, how should I go about fertilising for next year? Should I not fertilise for the first couple of months of growth to avoid damaging new roots? Here's a pic for reference. So I assume that ideally we'd keep the base and air layer the top off. And so we want to know like what's best for fertiliser. So fertiliser hampers osmosis. So roots don't drink like a straw. They absorb moisture across the membrane via osmosis. Now if you've got a high parts per million amount of fertiliser salts dissolved in the water is less inclined to be absorbed by osmosis. So it's not so much that the fertiliser damages the roots per se, it just hampers water absorption. So if you're doing an air layer, will that hamper root development if there's lots of fertiliser? Potentially. And so it's actually safer not to fertilise the air layer until roots have formed. Even then I don't fertilise air layers. The times that I have gone badly. So I think it's safer not to. But do you fertilise the tree that's being air layered? Yeah, continue to fertilise that. The roots of the parent tree aren't hampered in any way. So if you can apply fertiliser to the parent without applying it to the layer, I don't know how it looks now without soil. If you can do that, great. Continue to do that. If you can't safely do it, it's fine not to fertilise. The tree is still going to be vigorous because it's the last year's fertiliser that's driving the current year's growth. So if it's safer not to, don't. If you can do it safely, continue to do so however you would. But I wouldn't be fertilising the air layer itself. Potentially foliar feed, but even then with elm I haven't felt the need. They're vigorous, they root easily, they'll continue growing without fertiliser for a number of seasons, I find, so I don't worry about it. Safer not to. Alna Weinhard says, it's a bit of a long story, but I want to make things clear. About 10 years ago I dug up a shrub. I recently found out that it's a Japanese holly because it had history with my dad who had died. It was a wild thing, so I tried to tidy it up. The end result, a group of woody stalks with growth at the tops. Now I do see there is new growth lower down. It hasn't been out of the pot for quite a while, so I have no idea what's going on with the roots. I would like to make a bonsai out of it, but I'm afraid to kill it because of the memories. Alan and I chatted a little bit about this one over on the Facebook group. Join if you're not already a member. I've got a suspicion that it might be Lonicera. It just looks very familiar, the bark texture, the growth habit. Either Lonicera pileata or Nitida, however you pronounce that. I might be wrong. you know, I'm not in front of the tree, so I might well be incorrect on that one. Either way, what you'll have to do is reduce the height of the stems. You've obviously come to that conclusion yourself, I guess. So when it's healthy and it's growing well, it's got plenty of energy, cut each stem back to a side shoot, and as long as it's healthy and pumped up with energy, it'll produce all sorts of buds further down, and then you'll be able to decide which of those new buds and shoots you'll be able to use in the design of the tree. Because at the moment each stem is kind of taperless, you know, they're kind of straight, it's just growing like a shrub, which is fair enough, it's a shrub, that's what they do. And so by pruning it and then selecting side shoots, you'll be able to hopefully build up a bit of taper into the branches, do some selection. Also, a lot of what you'll decide is going to depend on what's beneath the soil. Is it multiple stems coming from the same base, or is it several different plants? You know, what you choose and how you move forward with it is going to depend on what you find. If you haven't already repotted it, it'll be, I guess, next spring that you do the repot. If it's the species I suspect it is, it's going to be absolutely jam-packed with roots. So have some pretty sturdy tools on hand. Lonicera can take a lot of root work. You could probably like cut off 99.9% of the roots and it'll still survive. Don't do that. Just want to reassure you that if it's what I think it is, it'll be fine to do as much root work as you need to. If it is a Japanese holly, I would be a bit more conservative. And what you'll be aiming to do, look up some of my videos on repotting. The principle is usually the same. You reduce the root ball back to something that looks reasonable, that you'll be confident will survive. Pot it in a slightly bigger container than the root ball with good soil around the outside. The roots will grow into the better, fresher soil. And then the next time you repot, you'll come underneath, pull the remaining old soil out, leaving as much intact around the outside, replace that with good soil, and then you'd have removed the old soil 100%, and the tree will start moving forward, making leaps and bounds in progress rather than baby steps. Good luck, let me know how it goes, and any other questions come up, get back to me. Staying with ulna, ash trees give me a bit of a headache, me too. The branches always seem to grow in pairs, and they make me wonder if I do the tree an injustice if I would cut one of each pair off to make them seem more natural. There's two parts to this question. Let's tackle that one first. So this bud or branch arrangement is called opposite. You get two buds opposite each other along the branch. The other pattern is alternate, where they alternate. With opposite, you've got a choice, as you've sort of alluded to. You can either cut back to a pair and let them grow, or you can remove one shoot in each pair so that you get this alternate. I think turning it into an alternate pattern is preferable, but it's, you know, cutting back to two and letting them grow is also a completely valid way to build up your ramification, your branch structure. The only thing with the pair that you need to watch out for is that the two shoots will grow off at roughly the same vigour, and because they both thicken at the same rate, you can sort of get like almost like a knuckle form at the end, and so you'll sort of ideally cut back, the two buds will start growing, and then cut one back so it's shorter, let the other get a bit longer, if you see what I mean. That reduces the amount of swelling coming from the junction. It's not as bad as if you had three all growing in the same place, but it's still something just to watch out for. And yeah, the other approach is to wire some movement into the whole branch, remove a bud at each node, and then you'll get the nice alternating branch structure to form your secondaries, and then you prune, trim to build up the ramification. You're not doing the tree an injustice in either approach. They're both valid. You do what you've got to do to build the branch structure in a style that suits the tree. Sometimes there might be buds next to each other and the rest of the branch is I don't know, maybe it's too coarse, so you cut back to the 2. Other times you'll have a nice length of branch and loads of buds along it, all with nice tight internodes, and then you'll do the selective removal. There's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong way of doing it. It's just a case of adapting to what the tree has given you. And then, like the second part of that question, there are 2 volunteer ashes growing in my garden. They have been there for a few years. Today I cut them both down to about 30 to 40 centimetres. Now I wonder how to get them out of the ground to turn them into bonsai. I've read that you can cut the roots in a circle around the stem to promote final root growth before digging them up. Is that the way to go, or do I just dig them up and see what's going on with the roots? Because of the delay getting this answer to you, you might have already made a decision on that. If they're fairly young trees, what I would do is simply wait for the time to be right and dig them up. Because being young trees, their roots wouldn't have had a chance to really stretch. Well, not stretch, but the roots wouldn't have started to like wander away from the trunk. So there's much more likelihood of having fine feeder roots near to the trunk when you do dig it up. So that's what I would do personally. If they're older, if they're getting a bit older, maybe the canopy's getting a bit bigger, and within I don't know, a metre of the trunk, you suspect there might not be much fine feeder roots, by all means cut the perimeter. And being a vigorous deciduous tree, by the time you dig it up in the winter or the spring, plenty of fine feeder roots would have developed. But yeah, I don't think it's essential. Much more important when the trees are older and harder to collect, ash being quite vigorous and these being quite young, I don't think it really matters so much. Yeah, to be honest, I would just save myself the work and dig them up. Yeah, good luck. Okay, on to the next question then. Barry Cox says, I notice on the Facebook forums, when asked, 99% of bonsai advice is to keep trees outside all year and mostly without protection until -5 degrees Celsius. Some even saying -10 for some species. My question is why? Why, if you have some way of keeping them just above 0C, would you let them go lower? Is there any benefit to them going lower than 0 degrees? Is it really an effective killer of pathogens? Or are the negatives, frozen root ball, desiccation, damaged root tips, etc., actually an issue? During the cold winter of 21-22, following that 40 degrees Celsius summer, I lost, as did many people, a higher number of trees over winter. I feel if they hadn't gone down to -8 for the 2 weeks, they would have fared better. I can't comment on what other people have been saying in the forums, but let me info dump what I know and what I do, and you can draw your own conclusions. Temperate trees that need to survive cold winters with freezing temperatures have a mechanism for not dying. They have a mechanism for surviving. I've got no idea why that tickled me. The way that temperate trees... the way temperate trees survive freezing temperatures is by using the energy that they build up over the growing season to pack their cells with antifreeze. So in each living plant cell, there is water. And as we know, when water freezes, it turns to ice, it expands, and if that happens, the cell can rupture and that causes damage. If that happens enough throughout the tree is going to at least suffer, if not maybe die. So how does a temperate tree cope with freezing temperatures? Temperate temperatures? It loads sugars and starches into the cell, into each living cell in the autumn, and those sugars and starches form a solution with the water that lower the temperature at which that water will freeze. So it acts as antifreeze. So as long as the tree has experienced the dip in temperatures that come with autumn/fall weather conditions, it will get itself ready for the winter period by doing just that. It loads its cells with antifreeze. Once that's happened, it's protected from cold temperatures relative to that species range. And the more sugars it has the ability to pump into each cell, the colder temperature it can withstand. And some plants are adapted for colder conditions like larch. Other plants can freeze, but they prefer not to. They, maybe they don't want to go below sort of -2. So is there an advantage to going way below freezing? Not really. Just because the tree can tolerate it doesn't mean it needs to experience it. As long as it experiences the dormancy, it's fine. Also, as long as it doesn't come out of dormancy early and then go back into the freezing temperatures, if you've kept it in a greenhouse, for example, then I don't know, whatever. But as long as it's gone through the autumn conditions that trigger this sort of antifreeze sugar loading phenomenon, it's then winter hardy. It doesn't need to experience the limit of its tolerance. Does cold weather kill pathogens? Well, it only kills pathogens that are susceptible, and the pathogens that live in your environment will be adapted to your environment, so they have a way to recover, otherwise they wouldn't come back each year. So maybe it slows them down, but it's not going to get rid of them. So there's no advantage to be gained there, really. This is all sort of just discussing plants, generally speaking. Then you start to talk about bonsai, where we're encouraging them to be in a more refined level of energy so that they produce the growth we want. They have less energy available to load into each cell to protect it from freezing. So that means that where, say, a Japanese maple might be perfectly happy growing in the ground, experiencing -6 degrees Celsius, whatever that is in Fahrenheit, in a bonsai pot you might come up a couple of degrees. If it's a highly refined tree, rather than just being in development, it's got less energy, potentially you might want to come up another couple of degrees. So if it experiences a light frost, okay, but you might not want it going into a deep freeze, the risk being that you'll lose ramification and roots. So where people are larch can withstand really cold temperatures, just as an example, if it's a really old, highly refined tree that's been in bonsai training for years, it might be several degrees warmer in terms of its limit before you start to see health issues. And what I'm getting at is it then becomes a gamble. Do you actually know what temperature problems are going to occur? You might have an intuition. You don't always know exactly what the tree is doing. You don't always know exactly what its tolerance is going to be. Maybe you think, I don't know, it's going to be going down to -4 tonight, it'll be fine. But actually, for some reason, the forecast was wrong and it goes down an extra couple of degrees and then you're losing ramification. If you don't have a polytunnel or a greenhouse or opportunity to protect it, well, fair enough, it'll probably be fine. You might just lose a couple of branches, a few twigs here and there. But if you do have the opportunity to keep the tree just slightly above freezing, then it is absolutely an advantage. There's no question. You'll be able to keep the roots drier, which means less risk of anaerobic conditions. The roots will be healthier, less risk of cold damage if you've keeping the trees dormant but not freezing is definitely an advantage. Did that make sense? Oh yeah, that summer where we had really hot temperatures, the heat will have damaged roots. This sort of goes back to what I was saying about things happening you might not be aware of. We had that like 40°C heat wave in the summer. That heat on the pot would have damaged roots. Well, we would have had no idea. We wouldn't necessarily have repotted to see the damage until the following year. So the tree looks great, looks happy. It came through the heat wave just fine. It's got a little bit less roots than usual, which means a little bit less energy than usual, which means a degree or two warmer that it can happily tolerate in terms of its winter hardiness. Then we get that surprise freeze, like I had down to -9, I think it was, that almost came from nowhere. And the trees that would have been okay normally are then actually like already energy compromised, so they're not as tolerant as they usually are, suddenly are dropping dead. You can't always predict stuff. Okay, that was a bit of a ramble, but we got there, I think. All right, let's go on to the next one. Daniel Fonseca says, I'm thinking of removing these 2 fat branches, or at least reducing them to the first secondary branch. Temps are sitting around 20°C and it's early autumn here. Should I wait or should I chop now? If it's early autumn, I thought you were in the Northern Hemisphere, I don't know why. Anyway, so if it's going into winter and it's a ficus, my preference would be to wait until it's heading into the summer, or it is summer. But I do know that you have a much warmer climate than we have here. Here, like, the sun goes down in November and we barely see it until March. So I have to play it a lot more conservatively with my ficus. Maybe that doesn't apply to you so much. Also, your tree looks quite healthy, so you might be able to get away with it. I don't know. My preference is to wait for the warmer weather, and that's what I'd advise if it was me. Maybe you've already pruned it. But yeah, like I said, my bias is with a less than ideal climate for ficus, so I would play it safer. Back with Barry again, Barry Cox. I saw on a beginners group about freezing temperatures and if a person should water a tree or not. I've always thought it best to keep the soil on the dry side when it's freezing. It seems there is advice to keep the roots packed in ice to insulate. This is the opposite to what I've learnt. Cold and wet is a root rotting recipe, or is it? As we mentioned on the previous question, the optimum is to keep it dormant, but preferably above freezing, because then there's a lot less risk of any issues. But the optimum isn't always possible. Not everybody has their greenhouse or a polytunnel. And then, so if you can't grow in the optimum conditions, it's then a case of picking your battles. I know, Barry, that you have a very similar climate to me because we're not a million miles apart in terms of location. And our battle, as you've alluded, is more with the wet than the cold. Aside from the occasional deep freeze, it rains more often than it doesn't over winter. So we're battling with the wet more than we're battling with the cold. I don't know where these people are from, but in other places, cold might be the bigger issue, in which case the extra insulation from watering might be, you know, that extra few percent that gets the trees through. And if the roots do suffer from the anaerobic wet and sort of conditions as a result, as you know, overwatering and anaerobic roots is a cumulative thing, and the tree's got a chance of recovering, whereas if a tree freezes right through, it's potentially dead in one day, sort of thing. So taking the hit on the roots being potentially wet for longer than they want to, but not freezing to death, is you know, it could be that that's the approach to take in that particular situation. So you have to sort of pick your battle. That's all there is to say on that, really, you know. Cold and wet is indeed a recipe for root issues, because cold soil dries slower, and so the amount of time that it stays wet is longer, and if it stays wet for longer, there's less oxygen getting to the roots, and therefore they may perish. And then if it gets too cold, the cold may also cause roots to perish. So yeah, cold and wet is a recipe for disaster, but not, you know, we can't always go with the optimum. I think that just about covers it. Right, where did we get to? Another one from Tim. Clip and grow or wiring. I know some trees are more brittle and due to this are more suited to clip and grow. Which are some of the more brittle popular species for bonsai? In terms of the ones that I work with, a few spring to mind. Potentilla can be wired. I wire them, but they can also be a little bit brittle, so you have to be careful, especially the thinner branches. Japanese maple, some varieties more than others. I do wire them, but I prefer to do it in the autumn. I find them slightly less brittle. Berberis, or aka barberry, I've broken a few branches on those, but that's usually because I'm trying to do too much in a small scale tree, but they can be brittle. Portulacaria afra have a reputation for not being wireable, but I have good results. Like, obviously you can't twist them up like a larch, but I'll wire most things and then sort of tailor how much bending I do to suit the species, as long as you're sort of paying attention, listening for any early warning signs, watching the stress point to see if there's anything freaky happening with the bark. You can get away with wiring most things. The ideal is that you'll wire the primaries, the secondaries if they need it, and then clip and grow for the tertiary ramification. I think with wire, like what takes one growing season to achieve with wire can take like 2 or 3 growing seasons with clip and grow. I don't know. That's my preference. I'm sure there are plenty of other more brittle species, but like I said, I'll give anything some wire. I find it a faster way to achieve the result that I'm aiming for. Just trying to think if there's any others. Fuji cherry, Prunus incisor, they can be a bit temperamental now I think about it. Kojo no Mai, I've wired them. Hit and miss results with those. Yeah, anyway. Tim Freeman asks, reusing substrate. What are some tips for reusing substrate? Do you need to sterilize it, and if so, how? Are there any issues to reusing substrate, and can there be benefits outside of saving money? I do reuse the soil that comes out of my pots. I use it in the garden, in the ground, beds, that sort of thing, so it doesn't go to waste. But in terms of bonsai practice, I only reuse it in very certain scenarios. There's potential benefit in terms of the soil is already inoculated with the healthy biome that came from the tree. I don't really reuse substrate very often unless it's like intact akadama for whatever reason, and I know that there aren't pathogens present. Sterilizing it. I've grown gourmet mushrooms, and to ensure that all pathogens are dead takes a surprising amount of work. And then if there are pathogens present, I kind of don't feel confident to use the soil again anyway. Like, even if I do sterilize it, I'll always be thinking, is honey fungus still going to be alive? Are there spores? Did I miss any? Did I not get them to the right temperature? If I use some sort of bleach product, does it not penetrate a certain amount of soil that then inoculates with pathogen? Then, you know, if you reuse potentially contaminated substrate and then the tree dies, you'll be like, well, was it the disease? Was it not? Was it something else? Was it who knows? No, I prefer not to. It's just, laziness does come into it. Like, just to be completely transparent, you'd have to sift the soil to remove organic matter, roots, dead roots and whatnot. The amount of soil I have, that would take hours. Then if I was going to sterilize it, it would need to be pressure cooked for an hour and a half. And I can only do, like, I don't know, say 15 litres at a time. Just doesn't add up. It's easier to use it in the garden and use fresh. I feel bad about it. I wish I could reuse it, but you know. On to the next one. Arizaji again. I have a question about Mame bonsai development and styling. What's the best way to grow a cutting or seedling to get the right proportions? Same as a future shohin. Are there some styling rules? With Mame and shohin, the most important thing is to keep an eye on the size of the internodes, unless it's a species that buds from anywhere. Because if the distance between secondary branches or primary branches is too large, it can spoil the proportion. That's kind of like the most important thing. Aside from that, all the normal requirements apply. A nice root structure, thickness of trunk compared to the height of the tree. Then obviously the number of primary branches you can have is reduced with the size of the tree, but enough branches that create the image of a tree that you're looking for. I think it's worth growing them slowly. I think the temptation is, oh, it's a small tree, so I can grow it really quickly and get a finished result really quickly. But I think growing them slowly, at least initially, is an advantage because the growth is a lot more manageable. But you still need to grow out and thicken the trunk. You still need to develop a nice nabari. So really the same principles apply, but I think doing it slowly is an advantage. So pot grown, I wouldn't try and ground grow a cutting or a seedling for Mame. It'll just go beyond the proportions way too quickly. There's an Instagram page that I will link to, a guy in Japan who grows Mame material. He uses some pretty cool tricks like pot in a pot growing to maintain the proportions of the nabari so that it doesn't get too thick while still allowing vigorous enough growth to thicken the trunk. I think it's mostly a case of getting the trunk thickness you need to have the right proportions while still having something that doesn't outgrow the size of my. It's all the same compromise. It's just exaggerated in terms of how important and how critical each decision can be. So it's better, not necessarily easy, but it's an advantage to go slower. It might take longer to get to the finished image, but you've got a lot less risk of it going bananas and outgrowing the proportions. And yeah, watch the internode lengths. Tim Freeman says, this yew was dug up last spring with Barry Cox's help. It looked like buds were popping but then stalled. Are there any yew-specific tips to get it going this year? So looking at the pictures, you've got green foliage and it was collected spring 2024. I wouldn't worry, Tim. The tree would have had an amount of energy. You dug it up. The buds we've produced using our stored energy, wouldn't be best to set them off growing just yet. Let's focus on recovering from the root pruning. So they just, instead of growing it, the tree just decided to hang on to them for a bit. Did they start growing this spring? Now that growth is underway, they might well have done. If they haven't, I still wouldn't worry. As long as there's green, it's all good. My experience of yews is that they can sulk a little bit, and what you'll find is that there's root activity going on underneath the soil surface. Just patience. I wouldn't even fertilise it. The risk is that the fertiliser competes with the roots for moisture, and so in the warm weather it can have a little bit of trouble, but the risk is low. But still, if the tree's not growing, it's not necessarily using fertiliser, so I'd just wait to see what happens. When it does start to extend some buds, then I'd give it some nice gentle fertiliser like fish emulsion. I like the BioBiz one. I'm not sponsored, by the way. This isn't an ad. It's just always a really nice one to use. I'm confident that it doesn't spend months and years sat on a shelf. Seaweed as well. That's a good one. I like seaweed for recovering plants. Yeah, I think you'll be fine. It's a cracking piece of material. Very envious of that one. It looks amazing. Want it. Okay. Oh no, that was the last question. Okay, if you got this far listening to me ramble, thanks for watching. If you're not a member of the community, we've got the Facebook group or we've got the Discord server, whichever your preference is app-wise. They're both there for you. The links are down below. Ask a question in the comments and I'll reply. If you have a more detailed question that needs pictures, head on over to the group or the Discord. Let me see them and I'll get you into a Q&A video. Take care, don't forget to water, and I hope you're fertilising now that it's spring, depending on whether you're in the... I'm rambling. Take care, I'll see you next time.